reputation alone, there are inferior films. Films.
Sequels suck. Sequels suck. Sequels suck.
Welcome back, movie fans. This is the podcast Sequels Suck. I'm your host, Cable Brandon, and today we are talking about the first sequel of a franchise that is big. It's still happening. There's still movies coming out. The first movie came out in 1996. The sequel took a little while to come out, got delayed by other things happening, but in 2000 we got Mission Impossible 2, which predominantly filmed in the country we reside in, Australia. And to talk Mission Impossible 2, I think is another fan of the franchise, Angus Brown.
Heyo, how's it going?
Good. I can't wait to.
Pumped?
I can't wait to talk about this movie because I think it's one of those ones that maybe unfairly gets looked down upon as the first sequel to the first movie, which was pretty big at the time in 1996. And sort of the way I think it was, I remember at the time, this one kind of felt like, the critics made it feel like this was the one that kind of killed the franchise, like it was not going to go get another sequel after this. So, but yeah, that's why I think now in retrospect, looking back at this film, and we'll obviously talk through it. I don't think they're right, but there's things that probably go against some of the critics as well. So,
This film is insane. I think it is worth acknowledging that off the top. Like, love it or hate it, it is insane. And even its staunchest defenders, I think, have to admit that it's especially up against what Mission Impossible is, the first one. Also, so a couple of things I think are worth highlighting right off the top. The first thing is a lot of people forget, especially these days, this is a franchise that is born out of an adaptation of a 60s TV show. A lot of people forget these days that Mission Impossible was a TV show that was around, and it was a bit of a big hit, but it wasn't the biggest thing in the world. So when they adapted it to a movie in 96, people were like, oh, all right, that, sure. Tom who? Tom Cruise? Tom Cruise is starring in the Mission Impossible movie? Like, it was a bit of a wacky thing. The other thing that's worth noting is like how much of a departure Mission Impossible 2 is from what was set up. Mission Impossible in 1996 was directed by Brian De Palma, which, for people who aren't super familiar with his work, Brian De Palma basically is famous for being the modern day Hitchcock. Like, he copied pretty much everything Hitchcock did. He started out his early career making horror films or weird little indie comedies with Robert De Niro, but like he's a horror film director who made insane stuff like Phantom of the Paradise, and he made Sisters. He made some other like weirder, smaller stuff like Body Double and things that have got cult followings now that weren't really big hits at the time. He tried to take a big swing with a movie called Bonfire of the Vanities, which starred Tom Hanks, and it was one of the biggest bombs in Hollywood history. So he slunk away from big box office things. So when he came to direct this, that was insane that they had Brian De Palma directing Mission Impossible 1. And it's just a straight up espionage thriller. Like, there's a little bit of boom pow action in some spots here and there, but it's a spy movie. It is about espionage. It's not about explosions. It's not about guns. I don't even know if Ethan Hunt fires a gun in the first one. I'm trying to rack my brain. If he does, it's fleeting. I don't think he does. I don't think he uses a gun at all. I think he might point it at Claire at one point, but he never fires it. This one is John Woo. Mission Impossible 2 is John Woo, the Hong Kong action director, and it is all explosions and guns and car chases and not espionage at all. There's very little espionage in this movie. It's just like, we got to get that thing. All right, let's get in a car chase. We got to get that thing. All right, let's have a shootout. We got to get that thing. All right, let's blow that up. It's this huge thing. I think like the first movie is for Mission Impossible will like buy you fine wine and make love to you, and Mission Impossible 2 will do Jaeger bombs and fuck. Like, it is a very different film that we dove into. And I think we have to acknowledge that at the top because, yeah, man, it's not for everyone. It's wild. It came out in 2000. It might be the most 2000 movie ever in the history of the world. Because it just like you watch it for 5 minutes, you're like, oh, this movie came out in 2000.
I know. In reflection too, I was surprised to hear that it was the biggest movie of 2000 box office wise, made the most money, and I'm like, what? Like that seems really random, but yeah. I mean, did you see this at the cinemas? I mean, I saw the first.
Yes.
Well, I've actually seen all of them at the cinemas, but definitely remember going to see the
I definitely
first
saw the
one
first
probably twice.
Yeah, and I
then this
absolutely
one-
loved the first one. Like,
Yep.
really, really loved it. People complained a lot at the time that the plot was too convoluted, and I'm like, "But have you ever seen a James Bond movie? Like, this is the simplest plot
Yeah.
ever." The plot to number two, people are like, yeah, that's simpler. I think it's way more complicated than number one. In fact, there's a
Yeah.
joke in Mission Impossible 2 that they like ad-libbed where Luther is asking Hunt, like, what is Chimera? And he's like, it's a virus. Chimera's the virus and the other one's the cure. And Luther says, oh, it's that simple, huh? And he goes, why not? Like,
Yeah.
why not be simple this time? And then they go out of their way to make it not that simple at all in any way.
Yeah, I
It's
think
it's a convoluted film.
it's funny because I don't really want to backtrack too far into your introduction, but I actually remember the TV show, and you said 60s, but maybe there was a version of the 60s and they came back, they reignited it, because in the late 80s, I vaguely remember it being on Channel 9, and they actually did either a season or some episodes in Australia because that was the big hook, and I still remember them doing it. So it's kind of funny to think that they did it as an American TV show, then they came and did a season or at least some episodes in Australia, and it was a big deal then. And to think that this second movie also did the same thing, kind of thing, came to Australia for its second film. And I actually remember there was a video game as well. I can't remember if it was Atari or Nintendo, but there was definitely a mission. No, I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the TV show had a video game.
Oh yeah, that was. I'm pretty sure that was Atari.
Yeah,
the TV series was 66 to 73. That's when it ran, and then it was in reruns. So they hadn't made it since 1973.
No, but I think didn't they do in 1988? They must have done a special. There was, I'm pretty sure there's either like a rebooted version, and it was done in Australia. I could be totally wrong, but I could have sworn there was another version or like a updated, almost like Gilligan's Island, run from a certain amount of time, but they come back and do telly movies every now and then, like Gilligan's Island and the Harlem Globetrotters and stuff like that. But anyway, we'll keep moving forward.
You're right. Yeah, they did. They came back in 1988.
Yeah,
and did 35 episodes.
Well, there you go. So, and I guess maybe that's still why it was sort of front of mind a little bit. Like the movie still took a while. You know, you're looking at 96, maybe, pre-production, sort of 93, 94, start getting it ready, and you sign up Tom Cruise, and then everyone's involved. I'm with you too. I think the funny thing is that, supposedly the critics said, "Oh, Mission Impossible, good movie, but overly complicated." So then
I remember
this
Mad
movie
Magazine doing like articles about how convoluted it was.
And I agree with you. It's like, well, it's espionage, it's spies, it's like James Bondish. Like it doesn't have to be, you don't want it super complicated, but you want it, to be, you don't want it just so basic and oh yeah, oh, that's a killer, oh, that's the guy, like you want to have some intrigue. And I think the funny thing, like you said, the irony being that they supposedly tried to make this one a little bit more easier to follow, I guess, is what I'm thinking. And they had that in-joke with making it simple. But I think this movie does suffer from, like you said, I think some of the storyline isn't neatly wrapped up because they obviously filmed a lot. And there's supposedly for a long time there was a bootleg version on VHS, which was John Woo's sort of first cut, or at least his initial cut was over 3 hours, like 3.5 hours, which obviously wasn't going to fly with, I'm going to say Paramount. And yeah, it was going to be one of those things that does not, they want a 2-hour film. And so I think, ironically enough, I think it's crazy because I think there is stuff that doesn't feel well explained in this, and I think that's because they cut the hell out of it, and a lot of it is set piece after set piece of action and not a lot of exposition.
Well, it's weird too because they cut it down. Like in the first one, if you think about it, you don't know who the bad guy is. Like that's the things like who is it that killed the team? Who is it that stole the knock list? You don't know what the knock list could like. You know, it's the undercover agents. If it gets out, it'll be a problem. But you don't know who's trying to sell it. You don't know what it's going to do. You don't know the effect of it once it gets out. You kind of given little bits of information, and then it's just like here, here is the character trying to figure it out. And this one is the opposite. We are told like in the opening of the film what Chimera is and what it does, even if it's not overtly explained. It's like, yeah, it's a virus, and this guy is injected. He's created a horrible virus. And we know that the bad guy is Dougray Scott because in the next scene we see him kill the doctor, and then there's no twist. There's no twist. There's no like, oh, Chimera is actually the closest we get to a twist is when Danny Newton's character injects herself with the virus, which isn't really a twist. It's just more like oh, okay, that's where they're going with it. And the closest they come apart from that is everyone every 10 minutes is actually somebody else wearing a mask.
Yeah.
That's like their big move in this one. Just like, hey, he's talking to that guy. No, he's not. It's someone else in a mask. And we're going to do that 13 more times in this movie.
Yeah,
and every time it happens, you'll go, what?
It's funny you bring that up too because I'll be honest, this is a movie that I hadn't probably watched in a little while.
I don't think I've watched it in like 18 years.
Yeah, and no, yeah, it's probably hasn't been 18 years for me. Maybe closer to maybe 7 to 10. But even then, I sort of did forget how many face mask jokes or like
all
gags there are. I'm
time.
like, oh my god! Like I remember, obviously the big one was the one at the end where they switch faces after, and he brings him in, and he notices obviously the finger that's bleeding. And,
So that means that Ethan Hunt, when he's breaking in to like save the day, was carrying around a mask of his own face and also this other guy's face preemptively.
Yeah,
because that was gonna be his move at some point. Like it, yep.
Yes, you have to. That's what you have to believe, that they've made the masks, and yeah, I think that I don't hate the face mask thing in Mission Impossible in general, but I think sometimes it gets overused and doesn't really feel realistic enough. In that, like I said, they've just had this punch on, and then all of a sudden he's got a couple of minutes to put the mask on for each, put the little voicing, and change their clothes and stuff like that. And it's just like, come on, man. Like, your job would have been simpler. Just kill him and, just make a run for it. I know he wanted to get the antidote and all that sort of stuff, but I sort of think, you made it even harder. But anyway, it is what it is, isn't it? It's Mission Impossible.
Pretty wild. It's Mission Impossible. And look, I think something else that is worth probably me flagging early on in this is that when this movie came out, like I was a teenage boy, and I think this movie is made for teenage boys. Like I didn't want an overly complicated plot, and if things did get convoluted, I was kind of too busy looking at the guns and Dandy Newton and the car chases and the explosions and Tom Cruise doing a somersault kick into someone's head to be too worried about anything. Like this and the soundtrack are just like teenage testosterone. It's like they just got 100%. A bunch of like 15-year-old boys to sit around and just like grunt and come, and they're like, we made a movie out of that. That's the DNA of this movie.
Yeah. It's sort of funny too, because I'd probably just come off, being at university and studying John Woo and seeing a lot of his Chinese stuff first, and then obviously Face Off, and sort of having that sort of evolution. So going into this all sort of pumped for John Woo, and then like I said, like very action driven, very cinematic. The music and the slow-mos and the different angles and all that sort of stuff is very John Woo. The dove, all that sort of stuff.
And it's the pigeons. Like, pigeons, not doves. There's all these pigeons and then just one dove.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Which was CGI'd apparently, yeah.
And we also don't have doves just hanging out around Sydney Harbour.
No.
There's a lot of, as an Australian, there's a lot of stuff in this where you're like, huh? Like, for example, in the first act of the film, when he convinces Dandy Newton to go and like go undercover with Dougray Scott, and she is going to a house on like Circular Quay. Like that's
Yeah.
which is not a real house. It's a fake house they made out of polystyrene, and you can tell. But she goes to his house, and Ethan is keeping an eye on her from a remote sheep farm.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
could only be
Yeah.
a minimum of like 6 hours away, even by helicopter. So he has
Yeah.
chosen to watch
Yeah.
over her from the like. It looks like he's in the Northern Territory.
Yeah, I agree. I had
This
to
big
I had to
farm.
laugh, and I've always laughed. And again, it's easier for us being Aussies and knowing locations fairly well. That yeah, I totally agree. It's not like that's an hour out of Sydney. That's like you said, that's minimum 4 to 6 hours easily. That's like full outback, and like you said, that's more North Queensland. That's Queensland
It
cattle
also
ranch
makes
sort of stuff.
no sense that even if it was like an hour, why would you go to a remote sheep farm to keep an eye? Like it's Sydney, it's a busy city. You could
Yeah.
get an apartment. Like the guy doesn't know that you're watching him yet. He doesn't know that you're onto him. You could be living next door for Christ's sake. You don't need to go into the middle of the outback to watch over her. That's
And-
just bad espionage.
It is, but I guess that's the only thing is that's just a cinematically, decision aesthetically, and to also show Australia in a certain light and what the expectations of some, moviegoers are
I'm
going to
convinced
think of
that whole
Australia.
scene is just so we could see Luther stand in sheep shit. They spent $2 million flying everyone out to the remotest part of Australia in far north Queensland just so you could watch Ving Rhames step in sheep shit, and that
Yeah.
was it, and get that joke.
Yeah, and then you kind of feel like the fact that they went all the way out there is like, how did we not have some real, real kind of Aussie cowboy on a horse, or just some token Aboriginal bloke walking in, just shot to say g'day or something like that? Like it's like you might as well have.
We get the Aussie cowboy. It's the helicopter pilot, the most
Yeah. Oh, that's-
Australian
oh,
man
yeah, that's
ever.
true.
Billy
Billy
Bean,
Baird?
Billy
Baird.
Baird, who just like says mate every sentence because that's what Australians do apparently.
What
Oof.
isn't it funny that Richard Roxenberg is obviously Aussie, but
Richard
he's
Roxburgh, yeah, he's an Australian
playing
player,
and he's
South
playing
African.
South African. Is that weird?
Yeah.
I know they probably didn't want to have
It is
Sean
weird,
Ambrose's
yeah.
character to have maybe an Aussie, bodyguard / second in command kind of thing, but it is an interesting choice. But then I don't know.
What I find weird is like, so this film is set like 95% in Australia. There's a few bits like early on that take place in Spain and Seville,
Yeah.
and then we're back to Australia again. But you've got one Australian IMF agent, presumably in Billy Baird, who is there as a helicopter pilot / I can get you anything guy. You've got Richard Roxburgh as Australian playing South African, and then you've got this big biopharmaceutical company which has Brendan Gleeson as an Irishman putting on an
Yeah.
accent that I can't track. I don't know if he's meant to be Irish or what he's meant to be. Like, just pick a lane. Like, why can't any of them just be where they're? Dougray Scott is the only one who's using his real accent. It seems
Yeah.
like everyone else is kind of trying to put something on, and it just seems wacky as hell.
Yeah.
Now you got a visual. So it's all right. So the plot of this movie. Let's explain that really quick. The plot of this movie is a crazy Russian scientist and his mate have made a super virus so that they could make a super cure. But it seems like they're not trying to make a super virus. They're trying to be good guys and make a cure to a disease, but they create the disease to make the cure. That's more convoluted than anything that happens in the first one. They test it on one of the guys. He obviously dies because it's a super virus. I don't know why they don't give him the antidote. Maybe they haven't made it yet. They never explain that. The other guy injects himself with the virus so he can smuggle it out for reasons unknown. I don't know why he's smuggling it out. Maybe because he wants Ethan Hunt to help him. And then Dougray Scott's character, is it Shaw? What's his name? I can't remember. They were
Sean Ambrose.
Sean Ambrose. They capture him, kill him, take the virus. I don't know how they get the virus if they kill him. Anyway, the plane blows up. Tom Cruise climbs up a mountain, and we're off and racing. I found it very weird in this one, and I always found it very weird that when he gets like his mission briefing at the start, he gets the Sonny's Oakleys product placement, first of many in this movie. They love product placement in Mission Possible 2. he can only pick 2 members of his team. That seems insane. That seems arbitrary.
Yeah.
And the third one has to be a civilian thief, which is Sandy Newton, who turns out to be Ambrose's ex-girlfriend, who Ethan Hunt falls in love with immediately,
Yeah.
like too quickly.
Well, who
He just
wouldn't?
meets her. It's like, I'm in love with. But like, he's a spy.
Yeah.
He's a season.
Yeah.
Like when his whole team got murdered in the first one, and he was threatened with being the mole, he was still able to function like a rational person and was like, all right, I'm going to figure out who this is. I'm going to come up with this plan. I'm going to solve everything. I'm going to clear my name, and I'm going to find out who my friend's killer was. And he does it.
Yeah.
This one, he like meets this girl for 2 seconds, and then he's like, oh, I'm in love with her. And then his boss is like, yeah, we need her to help get this guy because he has a super virus that could destroy the whole world. And he's like, oh, but I rooted her and I kind of like it, so maybe I won't. And it's so strange. It's like he's meant to be a super spy.
Yeah. I think there's
that bit always struck me as odd.
Yeah, and I just wonder if that's still a lot of exposition that was cut from the movie, or even just there's been a bit of a time jump or whatever. Like you said, it seems very quick.
It is. He's got 48 hours. He's got 48 hours to find her,
true.
recruit her, and then get on with the mission. So it's less than 2 days between meeting her, sleeping with her, falling in love with her, and then dropping her off in prison.
Yeah.
So that what's his face can say.
Sean, yeah. I'm glad you brought out the mission because it was something I thought of saying, bringing up on the podcast, and always would have forgotten until you brought it up. So Levi was actually watching some of this with me, and I normally wouldn't. I was like, Mission Impossible, what could be worse? And he thought it was so cool, at the start. And I said, you watch it. I said, he's going to throw these sunnies off because they're going to explode. And so he sees him throw the sunnies off and they explode. And he was like, oh, that was amazing. But then the funny thing was he missed the whole middle scene or whatever. And then he came in later on as I was watching the back end. And then when Tom Cruise he's on the motorbike and he slides off, then he resets himself and he puts sunnies on. Levi's like, but they'll blow up on his face. And I'm like, well, at least
Smart.
he kept, he's like, oh, won't those sunnies blow up? I thought, oh, that's actually quite smart for a 5-year-old to actually be cluey enough to go, hang on, that's dangerous, man. Don't.
Yeah, he's smarter than half the characters in this movie.
But you're right. I think one of the things I was reading, in research for this, like one of the major criticisms was, like you said, plot holes and just things that were a bit too convenient. And that's the thing. It's like you wonder, with so much cut out, was there better exposition? Was there better explaining about why characters did certain things the way they did? You're right. Why did I can't remember the Russian's name. I always think it's Boris the sneaky fucking Russian from Snatch. But
I know he's played by Ray Zabaka, who is an actor who popped up in a bunch of stuff I really liked.
But he obviously puts the virus in himself, right? Which kind of makes sense if he knows they're up to something shifty and he wants to take it for himself or the highest bid, or he just wants to get rid of it. And if he's putting maybe the last sample into himself, it makes perfect sense. But Ethan Hunt has to still go into that lab because there's all these, live culture or the virus getting made, and then there's the 3 still in the gun, and you go, well, then I don't understand why the other guy injected himself and tried to get out of Sydney to get to Atlanta with Dimitri. I was like, I'm confused by all that. And like you said, when Sean pretends he's Dimitri to try and get the antidote or whatever, like what's his motivation? Like his motivation is the money, but it did feel like they've either taken a whole section out that kind of explains it a bit better, or they didn't really think about it very well because it really doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't.
And the other thing I thought was interesting when, chucked on some of the extra scenes on the Blu-ray, and they talked about Chimera being the MacGuffin of the film. Like, some of the writers are big Hitchcock fans. Chimera is just a MacGuffin. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but isn't that the whole point of Ethan Hunt's mission? And they got, I don't know, like, how is it the MacGuffin, or is it not?
It's not a MacGuffin because they do literally have to stop this virus getting out because it will kill a lot of people. You're right about the Hitchcock thing, because this movie is the plot to Notorious, a Hitchcock film. It's not like A little bit. It's like it is the exact same movie.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that always jumped out at me as being really weird is how funny they try to make this one. And it doesn't really land, but just things like I talked about with like Luther standing in the shit and then
Yeah.
saying shit, and then Tom Cruise going, exactly. And there's just lots of bits where they try and do jokes, and Billy Baird's character is like obviously meant to be some comic relief. Like they really push
Yeah.
to make this movie funny and goofy, and it's not. It doesn't
Well,
land. Like they
and
want
you,
us to think it's really
yeah.
goofy, but also still buy into the stakes the whole time. So the tone is really off for this one.
Yeah,
It's
well,
quite
even
strange.
it's funny you say that because even Luther, the extension of that shit joke is that Luther's like, these are $800 Gucci's,
Yeah.
and then so it's obviously the materialistic. I'm like, why are you going to the middle outback on a mission in Gucci's? And then later on, when he gets a bullet, like it grazes his Versace. That's my Versace, and it's like, man, what is that? Like, why are you wearing?
Also, where's Luther getting all this money?
Yeah,
We get
I don't know.
we get told like the chief of the IMF in the first movie get told gets paid $62,000 a year, which is why it's so common that they would, betray the agency because they're government. They work essentially for the CIA. They get paid fuck all. They're not millionaires.
Mm,
Where are you getting Gucci money, Luther? What's going on? That doesn't
yeah,
make sense. Also,
yeah,
but
good.
also, where is anyone getting any money? Like all these masks and the voice changes they have, that's like tens of thousands of dollars per mask and per voice changer, and they are just throwing them away like they're candy wrappers.
Oh, 100%.
No, I'm done with this voice thing. Blah blah. I used it for 2 seconds to trick a girl. La 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 la.
Yeah,
You
it's
stole
fun.
this virus because you need money.
Yeah, well,
You're broke.
the other funny thing is, you're talking about the location of the where they are the shed, which is like pretty much the outback. I mean, like, what's the fuel cost of getting the helicopter out there? Like, that's a couple of stops back on the way to Sydney. Like, come on.
Yeah, that's wacky. There's a lot of wacky stuff in this one that doesn't really need to be there.
But I did.
Another
I kind of
quite
do
cool.
like the Australian stuff. Like I was saying, and again, Levi's going through that phase where he's just identifying car makes and models, and he loves cars. And you see old Fords getting blown up and blown to bits towards in that back end. And I think there might be a Nissan Patrol in there. I'm pretty sure, but it's two motorbikes and pretty much you know two or three Fords that get absolutely blown to bits. That was pretty cool, and that does feel sort of. I know Ford's a big thing in the States too, but I thought it was interesting because Holden versus Ford's such a big thing in Australia, or was in Australia many in that era, like 90s and 2000s. So it was kind of cool to see these old Fords just hooning around and then just cobbing it.
Yeah, and it is cool to see a lot of the Australian landscape that pops up
Yeah,
in bits and pieces, and see Sydney pop up in the Opera House. Obviously, it's nice that it features. It's weird that Australia or Sydney specifically features so much as a location point in this movie, but for absolutely no reason.
yeah,
Like that doesn't often happen. Normally, like, oh, we've got to get to Russia because the nukes are there because that's where the nuclear storage facility is, or oh, we've got to get to this small island because a dictator has overthrown the local government. And like a lot of the challenges in these sorts of movies, when they're globetrotting, are location specific. If you watch James Bond, James
yeah,
Bond has to go to a country to meet a target, to get like to do something. Everyone just kind of is in Sydney in this movie just cause.
yeah,
Like they get the virus. The guy at the start gets the virus. It's like, I'm going to Atlanta, and he gets on a plane and he flies out of Sydney, and all the bad guys are on the plane, and then they jump off the plane and then all come back to Sydney, but they
yeah.
already have the virus. They don't need to be there. And everyone just is like, yeah, it's all happening in Sydney. Sydney's the place for this movie, but there's no reason for Sydney
Yeah,
to be the place.
I guess that's the other thing too. Like, even you talked about the styrofoam house, which I didn't know was styrofoam until probably recently. I hadn't really thought about it too much. I believe obviously it was demolished straight after it was put there for the movie and taken away and demolished. Um, and I'm assuming the other stuff when they're inside the house was obviously done on a set. I believe.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, I
assuming.
think it was shot location somewhere else.
Okay, yeah. Because I did actually think there was a shot when Harry and Sean are talking and they're talking about the money, and there's the shot of the bay in Sydney, and I'm like, that looks like a really fake, almost like a matte painting in the background. But yeah, I should. But you're right too. I think obviously they shot a lot in Sydney. Nicole Kidman and Tom were together at the time. She was very pro, like, yeah, we should film, and I think that she filmed something at the same time, or she
Birthday
got her,
Girl, yeah, she was filming a
yeah,
film set in England, but she arranged for part of
yeah,
the shooting to happen in
yeah.
Australia
But
so that
also,
she could hang out with Tom.
and at that time, it was also very hot to go, oh, Australia's kind of a cool place to shoot because we double our money in Australia because, our dollar was so shit compared to the American. So they were making, they were able to do a lot more things. And then we saw Star Wars come here not long after. So, Hollywood was looking at Australia, and it did feel like, I kind of like it that, you watch this movie and you do feel like it's a glorified kind of advert for Sydney and Australia, almost like a tourism campaign. But you're right, it does feel super convenient that everyone seems to revolve around Sydney, and like everything seems to come back, which I agree with. Like Mission Impossible, James Bond, these sort of films, I feel like they need to be moving continent to continent. They got to chase people around the globe. It's like, we're just going to stay in Sydney. Like,
It is weird that they just hang out in Sydney for the whole movie.
yeah.
They don't yeah. I almost called him Bond. Hunt is like climbing a rock face somewhere, and when he at the start of the movie,
I think is that
Seville.
Utah, somewhere in Utah. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he's on holiday somewhere. Then he goes to Seville. Then he goes to Sydney, and he stays there. No more globetrotting. It is like it's a small qualm because it is nice to see Sydney be Sydney. Like this film came out a year after The Matrix, which was
Oh yeah,
filmed
that's
in
right.
Melbourne,
Correct. Yeah.
and Melbourne is not Melbourne in that. It's just a generic city or a US city or something. I can't remember if they ever specifically say which city he's meant to live in, but it's not Melbourne that he lives in. So it is. It's one of the few films of that era that was filmed in obviously Star Wars. It wasn't Sydney. Where they filmed it in the town, and they're like, yeah, no, this is Australia. We're not going to put any Australians in the movie, and the one that we do put in, he has to speak South African, and the other guy is going to be a comic book version of Australian. That's what you get. But yeah, we're in Australia. We did it. This movie, in addition to being the highest grossing movie of 2000, is one of the great what if movies of all time for a couple of reasons. Two lesser ones, and then one. Well, actually, one lesser one and then two very, very big ones. So the first one is that Thandie Newton was meant to be in Charlie's Angels. She was meant to be an angel, and she had to drop out because this movie ran over schedule.
So who replaced her? Because that's recent information to me. Like, to be honest, I hadn't heard that until recently, and then that was obviously confirmed when I did some.
I believe it was Lucy Liu. I think they swapped her out for Lucy Liu because Drew Barrymore was an executive producer on it, so she put the movie together. So she was always in. Cameron Diaz was one of the hottest stars in the world at the time, so she was definitely in. And then I think Thandie Newton was kind of up and coming, and she was going to be the not white angel. And then
I was going to say
a different not white angel, because that was how they rolled in the 2000s. You could only have one person of color in a feature film at a time.
And then the other one we've discussed this previously on one of our episodes.
I know there's another one before we talk about that one that I only recently found out about.
Oh,
so
okay.
The other big one is that this is the first film ever that Metallica agreed to write a song for. So they wrote the song I Disappear for Mission Impossible 2 specifically.
Yep.
A rough cut of the song before it was finished and ready to be released got released on Napster.
Oh, yes.
That is why Metallica sued Napster and went after them, and it ultimately led to the downfall of Napster, which a lot of people argue is the beginning of developers trying to look at other ways that they could get music out there online, which wound up with streaming, which is where we are now. So that is the first big step. They were the first person to be like, you can't give our music away for free. And they were mainly pissed off because it was not a finished product. It was the first time they'd ever put themselves out and be like, all right, we will write a song for a movie. We'll sell out a bit. We'll do that. And then people heard it and were like, this sucks. And it's not finished. Fuck it. We're suing Napster. Yep. And then there's the third and the ultimate what if, which is the biggest one, which we have raised a little bit on the show before. And I think a lot of people are probably aware of by now. And that is that this movie was getting filmed and going to come out right before what was set to be the biggest potential film of Dougray Scott's career, because he was cast as Wolverine in the first X-Men movie or X-Men movie. He was going to be Logan. It was all set to go. This film ran over schedule. They tried to change the schedule a little bit for X-Men because they're like, we'll see what we can do, but we no promises. And then he hurt his back in a motorcycle stunt and was like, I'm out for a while. And they're like, then you're out. And so they had to last minute find this other guy called Hugh Jackman. And it creates like this interesting paradox because
totally, they could do the multiverse and Dougray Scott could be Wolverine in the multiverse of X-Men / MCU.
I mean, it would be nice for him if they did. If
that'd be
one
awesome.
of the multiverses, they gave him a cameo. But also, you have to ask the question: if Dougray Scott doesn't go over schedule and doesn't injure himself and does play Wolverine in that X-Men movie, is that movie a big of a hit? Does that lead to multiple X-Men movies, which leads to a resurgence in comic book movies, which leads to the MCU, which we are currently seeing is taking over cinema? I mean, he's fine in this movie. He's not like when he's on screen, I'm not like, thank God he's back on screen. He's not Hugh Jackman. Like, he doesn't have the thing that Hugh Jackman has, where it's like, oh, that guy's a movie star. That guy can carry films. And I don't think it is a coincidence that Dougray Scott is not a movie star on parallel with Hugh Jackman now. Not to say he's not a great actor. He is. He's not given a great deal to work with in this film. But he's also not like doing anything exceptional with what he's got in this film. Ving Rhames is not given much to work with in this film. I'm delighted every time Ving Rhames comes on camera in this movie. So, if he's Wolverine, is it as good a movie? Is it as big a movie? I don't. Would we get 3?
No, I don't think so.
Dougray Scott spin-off Wolverine movie.
Look, it's really hard to be super critical because again, it's the sliding doors moment that hypothetically should have happened. It's happened. Different events have turned out, and maybe we're a little bit biased, maybe because we're Australian, and I was wrapped for Hugh Jackman.
Man, I would pay so much money to see Hugh Grant be Wolverine. Make that a multiverse movie.
Yeah. But I think there's something about Hugh Jackman. Every time I watch this and anything Dougray Scott's been in, I kind of go, I don't hate him as an actor. I just don't see him as Wolverine. I don't.
No.
I don't. It's funny because I feel like he's got also that face, not quite resting bitch face, but he kind of just looks like a jerk at rest. And it's like Hugh Jackman kind of just still can have a smile and look serious, but just it's not like you want to punch him in the face. Whereas I think Dougray Scott
he can be a lovable jerk. Like he plays Wolverine as an absolute asshole, and there's no point where he doesn't have a scene where he's suddenly like, oh, give us a cuddle. Like, he's still a dick in the whole movie, but there is something about him where you're like, you're kind of like a lovable, gruff little scamp, and I kind of still want to hang out with you, even though you're so grumpy all the time. Whereas, Dougray Scott, you look at him, you're like, what fucking?
Oh, no, he's a super
Cheerios, mate. What's going on?
Yeah, and
I don't like Sabretooth. Get him jacked up and get him to play Sabretooth or something, or he could be a good Magneto.
Yeah,
he's definitely someone who you look at me like, fuck you.
Yeah, I agree. I think
great.
Look, it's great. It's great if you can, be an actor that can do a multitude of things and not be pigeonholed to be always a villain or always a good guy. You can do a bit of everything. But I do feel like seeing him in this, I just can't buy him as Wolverine. I'm sorry, but that's just. And maybe that again, that's one of the great things. The other thing I'm glad you brought out the fact that shooting went over schedule. And this is something I only just found out recently as well. Was, I don't know, maybe in my mind I just thought there was a lot more reshoots than normal. But I'd forgotten that there was really bad weather in Sydney and in Australia at the time, to the point where that obviously pushed out, I think, was it 45 days of shooting because the weather was so bad, a lot of rainfall and stuff, that a lot of the stuff they obviously wanted to do, they couldn't do. So it was like put on, just on the back end. And that's obviously, like you said, affected on flow onto other projects and calendars. But on the flip side of that too, this movie should have been made probably 2 years earlier, but it was because Eyes Wide Shut was, pushed so
I mean, that's
much
where it all
by
began. That's the
Kubrick, and
beginning
then
of all of these trickle-down effects that have happened
yeah,
to cinema over the last 23 years.
mm. It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy
Yeah,
how it can affect so many things. Can I ask an honest opinion? You talked about being a teenager at the time, and there was all this great stuff for a teenage boy. Tandy Newton, what was your initial thoughts, or you know,
I remember thinking when I watched movies like, oh yeah, she's pretty hot, but honestly, she's a bit of a non-event.
oh
Um,
really? Okay,
yeah, like she's definitely the hot chicken. I mean, she's the only female in the entire movie, so
yeah,
by default. But yeah, she's definitely played to be the sassy, cool one. But yeah, it was never. I was never putting on Mission Impossible for the 15th time because like I needed Tandy Newton fix.
yeah.
I think she's good in the movie. I think she's really good in the movie, especially watching it now. I'm like, oh yeah, you
Oh
are
yeah.
doing a lot of good
Well, I was
stuff.
gonna say,
That opening scene where you're
yeah,
like trying to steal the jewels from the bathtub and he's there and he's being a bit flirty and weird, which again is like the last time we saw Ethan Hunt, this was a very different character. This is a
yeah.
totally different character you're playing in this movie, Tom, but that's
It's
fine.
almost like
But
he's
she
got like
does a great job.
It's almost like he's got the army haircut in the first one. This one there, he's got the long flowing locks, and it was like, what?
Yeah.
What are
He's
you,
a cool guy
Fabio?
now.
All of a
A
sudden,
cool
yeah.
guy. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that's all. Well, without trying to objectify Tandy Newton, I think, well, not to say I was not impressed when she was in the movie when I watched it at the cinemas in 2000. I was like, there's definitely some sort of there's something about her, and I understand why she was cast, but I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, and maybe that wasn't my thing when I was 19. But now watching, I'm like, oh my god, of course she would have. She's amazing, or at least looks amazing on screen, and I think it works. I'm not sure about the chemistry with her and Tom Cruise necessarily, but I think just her walking, even with the flamenco dance in the and she's walking across, and they lock eyes, and there's definitely some good stuff. I really love her in this movie. I just think it's a shame that she was supposed to join the team and at least be part of future projects, and then obviously delays, and the fact that this was, even though it was financially a good movie, I think critically it was kind of panned, and maybe the next project took a while to get off the ground, that she had moved on to other projects, and
Well,
it
she
wasn't
turned
brought
it
back.
down. She was
Yeah,
offered it. She
okay,
turned it. She
yeah,
was the one who didn't come back. So they were
yeah.
like, "Yeah, we're going to bring you back, and you're going to be an ongoing character." And she was like, "No, I'm not going to come back for this one."
But
Same
I
with
think,
something that people forget a lot is Brian De Palma was asked to come back and
yes,
direct this one again, and he was like, "No, I think I'm one and done. I'm good, thanks. I don't want to do a franchise." So people kind of like, "Oh, they kicked him off and they keep changing everything." He's like, "No, they tried to get him back. They tried to get Andy Newton back." Um, obviously they did get Ving Rhames back, and apart from Tom Cruise, he's the only one who's been in every single movie so far, which is great. So
yeah.
there's room there for characters to return,
But
but it is a shame.
But John, it's
I
funny we talk about this movie too. John Woo was I think the only director of any of these Mission Impossible movies has never been asked back as well. Whereas every other director that's directed one has been asked to come back to do a sequel, or again at least another film, and he's the only one that's never been asked back.
Yeah, I
So
don't. He's done a couple interviews where he talks about how he's very nervous. He doesn't like heights. He's very scared of heights, but he also got very nervous about Tom Cruise doing a lot of his own stunts,
yeah,
and obviously
yeah,
that has gone on a lot further since 2000, and it's become Tom Cruise's brand, and he's literally hanging onto the side of airplanes or climbing buildings without ropes. And any of the big stunts in this one, like when he's climbing the rock face, he had ropes that were digitally removed and did things. But there were a few stunts that were genuinely dangerous that John Woo was like, "Oh, the stunt double will do this," and Tom Cruise fought him on that and was like, "No, I'm going to do this because this is what I'm going to do. I don't want to lie to the audience and all these reasons that."
and lie to the insurance companies as well.
He did lie to the insurance company. Yeah, he lied. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do the stunts," and then he did like 95% of the stunts or something. But yeah, John Woo was constantly like, "You're not doing this." He's like, "Yes, I am," and really freaking out. And I think that Tom Cruise doesn't like to work that way. There is rumors going around that are semi-substantiated that because Tom Cruise was a producer on this, he was technically John Woo's boss. Like he hired John Woo for this movie.
Yeah.
He locked him out of the editing suite, and he was like, "I'm going to edit this movie."
Oh yeah,
Bring it half hour
well,
film, and I'm going to take
I don't
over.
even. I don't know if even if that's rumor anymore. I think that's pretty much. I don't know. I feel like at least it's the urban legend that's become truth now. That was John Woo never got to get final cut. There was Tom Cruise and possibly some other, I guess, editor or someone that is Tom Cruise yes man or someone that they were the ones that did it, and John Woo never got to at least finish his cut.
Which I would really like to see, because it does feel like this is kind of John Woo light in a lot of places. Like you watch something like Face Off and you're like, yeah, this is nuts. Like, but it's all very cohesively nuts. Whereas this film, some of it is nuts, and then other scenes you're like, this feels like kind of someone stuff it in. Something that really jumped out to me this time, which I don't think I quite picked up, the shootout in the lab in this movie. The setup, the action, the score, all of it is just straight Matrix. It is obviously someone watched the Matrix and was like, oh, that's what action scenes are now. We're doing that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Every part of it, the weird house techno beats going on, and the swing around, the explosion of concrete everywhere, and the glass shattering all around. Like it's just straight out of the foyer scene from Matrix, which is really weird and not very John Woo. Like there's nothing balletic or artistic about it. He's so good at doing art house action in a way where it's like, the fighting is like watching a dance. This is not. This is just like, let's have like cool stuff flying around. But the one thing that is very John Woo that happens so much in this movie it's like the only thing that really started to piss me off. I was like, there's a lot of things you can kind of be like, what? But ultimately, this movie is enjoyable, and it's not trying to be anything other than what it is. It is a fun action romp. But the thing that pissed me off is like every 5 minutes there is a slow-mo for no reason. Just like this one scene where like Tom Cruise is just walking along, and then it cuts to a different angle, and he's just walking in slow-mo for like 10 seconds. I'm like, why are you doing
you're worrying about cutting you're worrying about cutting a 3.5 hour movie down to 2 hours. You'll keep slow-mos in that are probably
like
essential.
in that action scene in the lab, when he's looking at Thandie Newton, even when she decides that she's going to inject herself, it suddenly goes slow-mo for a minute and then kind of carries on, and then he's talking to her and it goes slow-mo for it's like, oh man, just do the scene. And then of course when we get to the bunker and the pigeons and the dove are there, like, oh, we're going to get so much slow-mo. And you do. Every time a bird like blinks, they show it in slow-mo. Just roll camera. Come on, guys. That's really my only like big frustration with this movie. Just really is annoying what they do there.
I kind of I mean, look, there's definitely aspects of the movie I really enjoy. But like, I kind of think you've sort of said it. It's not, like unlike Face Off, even though that's maybe over the top action, it's still cohesive enough. Whereas this one does feel like there's parts missing, motivations missing, where everyone's at. I mean, I would die to see the VHS bootleg that was apparently floating around for a long time and then has disappeared. But if that ever came out on some sort of special cut, or maybe Tom Cruise made sure it disappeared. Tom Cruise and Scientology.
Let's start a hashtag. Release the Woo cut. Let's get it going.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because when I have previously defended this movie when people said, two's crap, it's rubbish. It's like, but was it, or did we never really see the really good finished product? Like, I'm happy to sit through as long as it's cohesive and makes sense. I'll sit and watch a 3-hour movie, with some espionage involved and some action. But I feel like it was a very truncated film. But again, who knows? It still could have been an unmitigated disaster at 3 hours and 30 minutes. I don't know. But I feel like the urban legend is that VHS that was circulated and maybe copied and people had seen, I don't think people talk badly about it. I feel like this John Woo work print was half decent. If he was wanting to release it like that and Paramount are like, no, that's not happening, you cut it down, then I don't know. I think that's when Tom Cruise comes in and makes sure he gets his slow-mo intros and exits and stuff like that. And then,
yeah, and it's it's still 2 hours long. It's not a
Yeah.
sharp in and out 96-minute action ride. It's a pretty long movie with not heaps of storyline that you have to put in. If you think about it rationally, it's like it's not a super complicated, like we said, it's not a globe-trotting, big complicated. They're not constantly introducing new characters. There's no twists that you have to set up and then pay off. It's just like, here are your main characters. You've got Tom Cruise, you've got the girl, you've got his two offsiders, you've got the bad guy and his henchman. That's it. Those are your characters. Everyone else is like inconsequential. You know, Brendan Gleeson is basically just there so that they can have someone to give them money. Anthony Hopkins is there.
Yes.
Anthony Hopkins is there because Ian McKellen turned the part down because he was doing a play in England. So that was meant to be Ian McKellen, which would have been a better fit, I think, because Anthony Hopkins just he doesn't seem to know quite what he's supposed to be doing in this movie. He just kind of shows up and is like, did the check clear? Like, yeah, the check cleared. All right, well, this isn't mission difficult. This is mission impossible. Difficult should be a walk in the park. That's lunch. And then he leaves. Like, he just, it's just so weird. His vibe.
Which again is ironic, going back to early conversation. Ian McKellen obviously turns up in X-Men. So, not that I don't think he necessarily, his scenes would be pushed to the end and him have to turn that down. But interestingly enough, maybe that was, I don't know if that was from the start. I believe Anthony Hopkins had 2 days to shoot and they ended up taking 5 possibly, but yeah.
So the Mission Impossible movies, like, I'm just looking now because the running time was such a big issue. They've been getting progressively longer. Like Mission Impossible 3 was about the same runtime, and then Mission Impossible Rogue Nation goes for 2 hours and 11 minutes, so it's a bit longer. Mission Impossible Fallout goes for 2.5 hours. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, they've had to split into 2 movies because it's so long. Yeah. So I think somebody owes John Woo an apology. You know, when we talk about this being the bastard stepchild of the Mission Impossible franchise, it is the one that had to do the work to make this a franchise. I guess like it wasn't a franchise until this one. Which is also the one that is the most of its time, I think. Like I rewatched Mission Impossible this week, the first one, because I was like, I want to watch them back to back because I remember them being really different in kind of vibe. And you can watch Mission Impossible this week, and it could have been filmed, a year ago. Apart from some of the technology they're using, like people seem a bit wowed by mobile phones in this movie, but it was 96, so leave them alone. But apart from that, like there's nothing in it that makes it feel like a specifically 90s era spy film. It's very like could take place in any time period. Yeah. Mission Impossible 2 can only take place in the year 2000. There's no way that this insane electro-colored freaking virus, which, oh, by the way, why does so when he's in the lab, he gets the virus, right? And he gets in this little gun, and then he gets the cure, and he puts the two together, and then he pulls the trigger, and so he's injecting medicine into a virus to cure a disease. That's what it's there for. But if someone's sick,
is he? Is that what's actually happening? I thought it was something else. Oh no,
one is the cure, one is the virus, and he puts it in, and it explodes. Why is medicine going into a virus cause an explosion? It's meant to go into people. What the hell?
No, see, I took that's weird because I took that as more that wasn't the antidote that was going in. That was almost like a blowtorch being applied to the virus to kill it.
Is that what you think it was?
Well, then like a gas or some sort of almost like putting a blowtorch to it and killing it in the gun. I don't know. You're right.
I'll accept that because it makes way more sense than medicine causing an explosion in the body. Just when he did it, I was like, "What the? What?"
Yeah. No, I took that as almost like almost that thing that it attaches almost incinerates what's in the capsule. Yeah, but that's how I looked at it. But you could be right too. I don't know. They like to put explosions where there doesn't really have to need to be an explosion.
Especially in this one. This one is all about explosions and Oakley sunglasses and Bulgari necklaces and Audi cars.
Yes.
And Motorola phones. Like lots of big product placement that really sets it now, and the stuff they're showing, like the model of cars that they use and the Oakley sunglasses that he puts on and the fashion is very, very
But
2000s.
I was gonna say though before. Yeah, so the interesting thing, you're talking about the eras, and the first one sort of kind of almost you could think it was made almost last week, and not necessarily timestamp the film, and but this is definitely early 2000s, that late 90s, early 2000s. But isn't it crazy looking back on this film and you're talking about someone creating a virus, or at least a pharmaceutical company creating a virus to create an antidote that they can sell. You think about what's happening in the world in the last couple of years, and you go, geez, someone's watched this movie and gone, that's a fucking good idea. That's our way. Get your money into PPE, get it
It
into
does.
gloves, hand sanitizer, and we're also going to manufacture the antidote or the shot that everyone's going to have three of them over the course of 6 months. Like you do any movie like that now, when you look back on, like I know you think about there's other movies out there like Contagion and stuff like that, and you wouldn't necessarily think Mission Impossible, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple idea. You can create a virus. I think Bill Gates over the last years said, "Oh, the next World War will kind of be like someone. All they have to do is create a virus, a super virus, and yeah, it's kind of thing. Conspiracy theories, or at least the bells go off in my head. Is like, well, Mission Impossible went with the story, use that as their plot, and who says, why wouldn't pharmaceutical companies? It's all about money and their stock, and their yeah. Anyway, but that's me going on my little conspiracy rant. But it's funny that sometimes watching a movie like this in the current climate is very interesting.
Yeah, it definitely watching it now, you're like, huh, okay. Something I do really like about the way that they play the sort of the sale of the antidote in this is that when Ambrose is like, yeah, so here you go, I've got the thing. He's like, great, I guess I owe you $30 million. He's like, not quite, I want stock because you're about to sell a lot of medicine and I want that money. And it really does highlight something that not a lot of movies highlighted, particularly these kind of movies back in the 2000s. Like, yeah, like the bad guys are bad guys, but also the people that they're selling, like what they're doing is really bad. They're profiting off people being very, very sick. And it is something that they do a little bit of a dig at in the first Mission Impossible, when they're trying to frame Ethan, and they're talking about how his family farm was in receivership because his dad died of a slow disease, and suddenly they've got all this money, and he's like, you shouldn't have money, your family went broke, because dying slow in America is very costly. And it's kind of like this little like, fuck the medical system. And then in this one again, it's like, yeah, we've got this this horrible virus we created and this cure for it, but we don't just want money. What we want is stock in it, because you're about to sell a lot of this because everyone's about to need it, and we want that. We want to be rich pharmaceutical giants because they're the real bad guys. It's like, wow, yeah, you guys are making some good points. Well done, Mission Impossible.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool when they sort of said, "Oh, we've got one person," but by the time it spreads, there's 3 million or whatever it was in Sydney and 17 million in Australia. That's people are going to need this drug, and then worldwide and all that sort of stuff. And you go, oh, remember we were 17 million people back in 2000? It feels like we're a lot more than that now, but yeah.
So
And
it's
does it blow your mind a little bit though that this is still the second, I believe, the second highest grossing Mission Impossible film?
It is the second highest grossing Mission Impossible film. No, it doesn't. It makes sense to me because, like, it sounds, like almost beating a dead horse a little bit to keep saying this, but movies were different. The movie industry was different, and the way movies were handled was so different in 2000s. Like, they were global events. There were these huge things. Things like MTV would run like half-hour specials
Yeah.
about the behind the scenes of making a movie when a movie was getting released, and every film had a super famous band or pop star recording a song, and the film clip was like clips from the movie or tied into the movie. Like it was about the movie being marketed and sold, and you could see the song out like a year before the movie came out in Australia, and you could see posters everywhere. And like the hype that was built around movies, especially big movies, like it's like a Paramount major release starring Tom Cruise, who has been for the past, I don't know what, 30 years, one of, if not the biggest movie star in the world. And certainly in 2000, it was like peak Cruise love. This is pre, jumping the couch. This is when he's married to Al Nicole. So in Australia, we're certainly like, frick yeah. But also, they were a power couple. Everyone loved Nicole Kidman. It was being sold as this incredible, wild, brilliant action movie that was cool, and it was hip, and that was the big like selling point. Like James Bond had really fallen out of fashion a bit in 2000. He wasn't quite cool anymore. He was getting a bit daggy, and there was no Jason Bourne to kind of reinvigorate the spy genre. It was Mission Impossible, and this was not just a normal Mission Impossible like the last one, which was a bit men just sitting around talking about lists. This is like leather jackets, guns, explosions, neon lights, car chases. This is cool. So the fact that that was their big push for it in the year 2000, I'm not surprised at all this movie made over $500 million, and that it still is the second highest grossing in the series. Because even though the Mission Impossibles are beloved and get huge releases around the world, and everyone is very excited about the new one coming out, and that there's going to be two of them, 2 years back to back. We haven't had that before. Not as many people are going to see it in the cinema. Not as many people go to the cinema, and people are going to watch it on streaming, but streaming doesn't count for box office. So you can say, 150 billion people watch this movie, but only 200 million of them went to the cinema to see it around the world. And that, that's just not going to equate. So you're not going to get, unless you get another Top Gun Maverick, or an Avatar sort of level of insanity where people are like, I'm going to see it 50 times. The people who do go to see Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Part 2 at the cinema, I would say maybe 1% of the people who go and see the cinema might see it at the cinema twice. The rest will be like, that's fucking dope. I can't wait for streaming. Or, maybe 10% of those people are like, I can't wait for the Blu-ray. But people just don't consume movies the same way. So it's not surprising at all that is like, for a long time was the peak. And then I think Ghost Protocol picked it, because they really went hard on that, as being the new way, the new direction of it. They dropped the numbers. This isn't Mission Impossible 4. This is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. We're rebranding and we're moving on. And I do remember, like, it was a big event because it had been a while between Mission Impossibles at that point.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a while between all of them, isn't it? I think we start in 96 and it's 4 years until Mission Impossible 2, which is, that's quite a while for a sequel.
Yeah.
And then it's 6 years until Mission Impossible 3. And then it is 9 years until Rogue Nation.
Are you serious? 9 years? Wow.
2000. So the Mission Impossible films were released 1996, 2000, 2006, 2015, 2018, 2023 will be the next installment. And then 2024 will be part 2 of that. And it's the only time in Mission Impossible history that they've come out back to back, and that's only because it's one big movie split into 2. So not only has this franchise been running for 2 decades almost by the time the last one comes out, they're taking huge breaks in between. So after 3, it was kind of like, it's done, it's a trilogy. And then when Rogue Nation came out, they really were like, it's back, Tom's back and bigger and better than ever. And so everyone was like, but we got to see it in the cinema.
But that's is that 4 decades? There's one each.
No.
90s.
So 90s, noughties,
teens, and then 20s.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. 4
Across
decades.
4
My
decades
God.
of. When you put it in that perspective too, it's like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and Tom Cruise is on the poster front and center of everyone. And you know what? He fucking rocks in everyone. Mission Impossible is a series I saw 3 at the cinema.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. And then obviously there's a big break. I never got around to seeing Rogue Nation at the cinema. I watched it. I rented it when it came out. Or I did I stream? No, 2015. Did I stream it? Maybe I streamed it. Wow. And kind of put it off a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, I guess. I think like one day I was hungover or something. I was like, oh, I'll throw on that Mission Impossible movie. I haven't seen that one yet. That'll just be on. And I got like a half hour in. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Why did I not rush to see this? Why did I forget these are fun movies? And then I did it again. And between
Failed.
Rogue Nation and Ghost Protocol, or other way around, is it? Yeah, no, Rogue Nation and then. And what am I saying? Oh wait, have I missed Ghost Protocol? Oh,
I feel like you missed it. I think you did miss a sequel somewhere.
Hang on. Did I miss a sequel? I must have missed one.
I think you did.
I'm forgetting Ghosty. I did. I forgot Ghosty. So, but it was still 2011. So still a big gap from 3 to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I skipped Ghost Protocol at the cinema.
Yeah.
And then when I watched it, I was like, this is really good. And then I forgot that I really liked it. And then I
it's
Rogue Nation at the cinema. And then when I saw it, I was like, why do I keep forgetting these movies are fucking awesome?
Which, you know what, it's crazy because I've seen all of them in the cinema and I actually like Ghost Protocol, but I feel like, and this is not just my perception, it's just, when you read stuff, I feel like that's another one that gets bagged as being really average. Yet the funny thing is the two average ones that people don't rate are the ones that made the most money. Like, go figure. Like,
Ghost Protocol is the climbing up the side of the building in Dubai, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that movie is amazing. That scene, when I was watching, I was like, this is the best. And then it's Rogue Nation is the side of the plane one, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. Also, the best. I think like it's because it's not like I don't know. Maybe it's because it's not a franchise that operates in a familiar way. Like you've got the James Bond movies are the James Bond movies. What are those movies about? They're about James Bond. What does he do? He's a spy and shit. I don't know. They're James Bond movies. The Jason Bourne movies are the Jason Bourne movies. What does he do? He's Jason Bourne. He forgot who he was for a bit, and now he's back. The Mission Impossible movies are not the Ethan Hunt movies. Like there are a lot of people who like those movies, and if you're like, what's the main character's name? They'd probably go Tom Cruise. Like, Tom Cruise is bigger than it's not the character. It's Tom Cruise does stunts in a movie called Mission Impossible. And so I think people forget like these movies. I think they almost forget these movies have plots, honestly, but they forget that they are about a spy, about a super spy who goes and saves the world or recovers the documents or completes the mission in some regard. But they're not really viewed in that way, and they're not sold in that way either. So I think it's really easy for people to look at one, especially with years passing, and be like, oh yeah, Mission Impossible 2, that's the one with the doves and shit, that one sucks. It's like, no it doesn't. It's the one that came out in the year 2000 that feels like it came out in the year 2000. And if you watch it and you go, what were people into in the year 2000, you go, leather jackets and Tom Cruise on a motorbike shooting a gun, like doing a wheelie on the front wheel. What do you mean? Everyone was wearing Oakley sunglasses in 2000. How dare you criticize Tom Cruise for wearing Oakley sunglasses that blow up, which is badass. Like, come on, guys, calm down. And again, I think Ghost Protocol, like they were repositioning in the wake of new Bond and new Bourne and a new idea of what a spy is. And it's interesting if you look at the advertising for it, like the poster for the Mission Impossible, the first one is like famously Tom Cruise's head side on, almost like a coin with the map of the globe. And then Mission Impossible 2 is the flames, and it's it's Tom Cruise side on with the scar and the gun. And then Mission Impossible 3 is kind of a mix of the two kind of styles. But then Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the cover was the team. It's not just Tom Cruise. It's like the whole IMF team is on the poster. And they were really being like, okay, well, if we've got like Bond out there being the lone spy, and we've got Bourne out there being the lone spy, well, this movie isn't called Ethan Hunt. This movie is called Mission Impossible. So we're going to make it like, it's the team, and that's what we're going to sell it on. And that probably shook people. They're like, wait, which one is this? I also think I'm always curious about the reason that studios decide to drop numbers. Because there's a lot of films they'll get to a certain number in the franchise and they no longer have a number.
Scream, Halloween.
yeah, they drop the numbers at some point because they think that people won't come if they feel like they have to watch the films before. Fast and the Furious did it in the middle. They just kind of dropped the numbers and became Fast and Furious, and then became Fast Five. And they're like, it's the fifth one, but we're not calling it Fast and the Furious Five. And then the next one was Furious Six. It's like, yeah, it's six, but we're not going to call it Fast and the Furious Six. And this one was like, yeah, Mission Impossible 1, 2, 3. And then they're like, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Dead Reckoning. They're not, you can watch them in any order because you kind of can. I mean, that's continuation stuff, but you can kind of watch them in any order. And Bond has always famously been like, no numbers for us, thank you.
Well, it's funny you bring that up too, because I do feel like, initially when Tom wanted to pursue this franchise, it was like there'll be, it's a continuation, but there'll be almost like separate chapters. So, like you're saying now, it does feel like it's not really, there's a continuity, but like I said, like this is Chapter Ghost Protocol, this is Rogue Nation, this is like jump in anywhere you can. Yeah, okay, it's great if you've seen the other ones, but we will have an adventure for you, and doesn't matter about that.
Yeah, I mean, Mission Impossible 2 has absolutely zero reference to Mission Impossible. There's no scene where he talks about how you're like,
well, I was going to ask you,
I can't trust people anymore because my mentor turned out to be the person who killed my own team, which you would think the perfect moment for that, when he like falls in love with this girl instantly.
Yes.
Be like, well, the last time I trusted someone, they turned out to be a son of a bitch who tried to kill me and killed their own wife.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that even links to the first one is the use of Dimitri as a name.
That doesn't link to the first one. That links to like the fourth one.
Really?
Yeah, they introduced the idea.
I thought there's I thought there was another. I thought there was a passing one in the first one. Admittedly, I haven't watched the first one for a little while, but probably a year or so. I thought there was
the closest they come is in the first one when they're having their meeting. Ethan Hunt complains about the coffee being shit, and can we get a cappuccino machine?
Yes, and then
in the second one, when he goes to the meeting, Anthony Hopkins like espresso cappuccino, and that's kind of like the closest you get to any acknowledgement that he wants a coffee or something.
Yeah, because I guess then that's another thing, like the whole Dimitri thing subplot, like that doesn't. How are we supposed to know that maybe one of his code names or his other names is Dimitri at the start of this film? Because I thought I felt like again, I'm obviously losing my marbles a little bit. Maybe I've lost a few brain cells, but I feel like there was like, it must have been the briefest of mentions or one of those little Easter eggs you've got to see, blink or you miss it, that one of his past code names, or he was referenced as Dimitri, and then he's playing Dimitri in this movie, or at least they use his fake name, and the Ethan Hunt, obviously the mask, Sean uses it at the start of the movie, and you go, well, that's why he trusts Dimitri. Like that must be his other. And then obviously, like you said, that comes up in another movie. But even then, that's not really well explained then in this movie. So I mean, that's frustrating. Like it's great if they references in what are you saying, like fourth or fifth movie, to make it circle back, but you kind of go, okay, that's one of his other aliases. That's great, but we probably needed to know that in the first movie, or there should have been a little bit of a, I don't know, made it a bit more clearer in this one that, yeah, okay, that's one of his aliases, and so other
somewhere in the 90 minutes of footage they cut.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Which we'll see one day.
I was going to say though, like I don't want to stay on it too long, but Tandy Newton, her not deciding to come back, but they had a plan for her. Would that even work? Like it would have been great to have a female member in the team. But if then he's in a relationship with her, would that just overcomplicate things for future sequels?
I mean, yeah.
Because I feel like the fact that they've replaced it. Well, they kind of replaced it with Michelle Monaghan in the next couple of ones. And look, we'll touch on that later, but I do feel like there's this, I don't know, weird, I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole, I guess that's for another episode. But, yeah.
So what do we think ultimately about this? Like, the franchise is still going strong. Like Dead Reckoning will be one of the biggest movies to get released this year. And depending on how it's received, Dead Reckoning Part 2 will probably be one of the biggest movies of 2024. And like you said, we're 4 decades into this franchise existing. A franchise, by the way, that should never really have come to be. Like,
Yeah.
there is that little bit at the end of the first Mission Impossible where he quit. By the way, Ethan Hunt can't stop quitting IMF. This is the only Mission Impossible movie where he actually works for IMF.
Yes,
The
correct.
entire series.
Yes,
He's
correct.
either on the run from them or quitting them, or
He's the mole.
it's been shut down or something. Yeah, like, because a movie about the Impossible Missions Force, he's never in the Impossible Missions Force. But so this movie like gives us a little hint at the end. He quits. He's like, yeah, I quit. I'm out of IMF. And then he gets on the plane, and the hostess is like, oh, would you consider the Theater of the Caribbean? And he's like, oh, there's another mission. And then in this one, there's no acknowledgement that he ever quit or was disavowed. He's just an agent again. But the first one was very self-contained, and that little moment at the end obviously was like a little bit of fun. But it's not meant to lead into anything. I don't think that was ever the intention. It was just like, oh, yeah, this will be a bit fun. It's a story that is told and completed, and I don't think anyone was expecting there to be a Mission Impossible 2. And then Mission Impossible 2 was a totally different genre of film, a totally different style of film that was obviously very beloved because it was the highest grossing film of 2000. And then it kind of, there was no sequel straight away, and then there was a while, and then finally the third one came out, and it's kind of like, oh, I guess they're doing a third one, and that'll be they did 3 Mission Impossible films. That's pretty fun. Why not? And then all of a sudden, a few years later, like, there's another one, and another one, and another one, and this is now a thing. This is a thing. Tom Cruise is making Mission Impossible movies every couple of years now, probably forever. We are doing Mission Impossible as a franchise, and it grew and it expanded. And this one, like I said, it's become the ugly stepchild that they don't want to talk about or acknowledge, because it is, like, if you sit down and watch the Mission Impossible films back to back, this one stands out. It is.
100%.
But how do we feel about it? Like, as the first one to come and as a standalone entity? How did it stack up this time?
I can't bag it too much in that I still think there's a lot of over the topness with all of them. Like, there's those moments like, oh, that would never really happen, or oh, as if you'd be able to hold on to that, or whatever it is. But so this one, like, the action is over the top, but then I feel like you got to put that in that time capsule of that's John Woo, and that was what they wanted. It was especially off the back of the hit of Face Off. They wanted that style, and like you said, the Matrix is another good lead into that kind of, the sunglasses and leather jackets, and just that style of, whether it's the soundtrack and the action and the flipping and the slow-mos here and there, all that sort of stuff. It's just a product of its time. It's enjoyable. Like, I look, don't get me wrong, I still enjoy it, but again, it's not one that, I guess that's the way we've got to look at these sequels, is how often are you going to watch them, and how often do you put them on? And I do feel like, unfortunately, 2 is the one I would have watched probably the least, or it's not one that I go to straight away to chuck on. Obviously the first one's probably the one I've probably watched the most. I've always liked number 3, but then all the others after that as well, I've always enjoyed as well. But unfortunately, this is probably the one I don't chuck on the most. Like I said, like, you probably hadn't watched it for a long time, and I probably, 10 years is probably a bit extreme. I'll say maybe I hadn't watched it probably for at least 7 years.
I haven't watched it for a long time, but it's definitely the one I've seen the most, because when it came
really?
out,
Yeah.
like, I owned it on I didn't own the first one on VHS, but I owned this on VHS, and I watched the shit out of it.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, at the time, I really, like, dove in on it whole hog, and then over the years, like, drifted away from it a bit. And most of the Mission Impossible 1, I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how, but a lot. Mission Impossible 2, I've definitely seen more. The others, like, most of them, I probably would struggle to have seen, like, more than twice. There's probably a couple in there I've only seen once, honestly. And they bleed in a little bit.
Yeah.
To each other. And I guess that is something you can definitely say for Mission Impossible 2. If you line up all the Mission Impossible movies and you're like, which ones do you remember? I'll be like, Oh, 1 and 2. I can tell you the beat
Yeah.
for beat what happens in 1 and
yeah.
2. And then the others I can, like I was saying before, like it's 4 the one where he climbs up the building, and
Yeah.
then 5, is that the one? You know, you kind of remember the big set pieces, but what's the plot of Ghost Protocol? I would possibly get it confused with the plot of Rogue Nation if I just had to pluck it out of my brain. I will never confuse Mission Impossible 2 with any of the other
Yeah.
sequels.
I-
It's
I'll-
not possible.
And look, it's probably going to make us both sound really bad saying we're doing a sequels podcast. But I agree with you. I think once you get to maybe after 3, but 4, 5, and 6 kind of, it does feel like they are less chapters in a story and they're more one continuous sort of arc of what's happening kind of thing. So like you're saying, it does feel like there's all this action and stuff that happens, but you remember set pieces, but you can't remember which movie it's from, because it does feel like it's this one big story arc with him being disavowed and him on the run, but then the corrupt IMF, all that sort of stuff, and Alec Baldwin's there as well. It does feel like there's a lot of the same characters cast. Simon Pegg's there, obviously. Ving Rhames is there, and does feel like it's part of that same universe. Was like you're saying, like one, everyone sort of, well, again, if you follow the movies, one is very memorable on so many levels, and then the second one is quite different, but still, you
It's
remember
memorable,
what.
baby.
Well, yeah, and it's memorable, and even the third one again, probably memorable, and obviously, someone that was in it, Philip Seymour Hoffman, sadly is no longer with us. He was really big in that movie, and there's aspects of that movie that are really memorable, but they all do feel like the first 3 do still feel like standalone stories, like they
And
could be
also
almost
3 very different directors. Like number 1 is
yes,
Brian De Palma, who I talked about, is basically his showing. Number 2 is John Woo, who is like Hong Kong action ballet stuff. And number 3 is J.J. Abrams.
yeah,
Like you would struggle to get 3 more different types of directors coming into direct movies.
yeah, 100%. And I do feel like those 3 films do almost feel like if you put it in like an anthology, sort of like in the analogy of them being the Star Wars universe, you'd say the first 3 Mission Impossibles are almost like the anthology films, whereas 4, 5, and 6 are kind of more like episode 1, 2, and 3, or episode 3, 4, and 5. Like feel like they're part of that continuation of that story. Whereas the first 3 are easily you could just chuck them on and watch them and just enjoy that ride, and that's it.
Well, I mean, it should come as no surprise then that from 4 onward, 4, which was directed by Brad Bird,
Which is
who
weird.
had
Is that weird? Oh, no disrespect, but that
that
when I
was his
had
first
Brad
live
Bird-
action film.
I know,
He
and
directed
that was
The
that
Incredibles.
crazy to me. Yeah, exactly. Not
But
that it's a
after
bad
that,
thing, but
they've all been directed by Christopher McQuarrie. It's the same
Yeah, okay.
director from
Yeah.
number 4 onwards, and you can see it. Like it's one director who's like, yeah, I'm telling an ongoing story now,
Yeah.
which is a very is it unique. I'd say is a less common way for these types of franchises to evolve. Normally, what happens is you have like the one director who comes in, does the first 2, possibly even the first 3, and then doesn't want to do anymore, and then you get almost directors for hire, film by film, who come in
Yeah.
and shoot one, and the films are very different and kind of jump around all over the place because people don't want an ongoing story anymore. They want things to get a bit wilder, and this one did it in reverse. It's like,
Yeah.
the first 3 films, even the 4th one, I think is kind of, it's in a bit of a middle where it's like I said, it's reestablishing itself. But the first 3 are very, very different movies that kind of go all over the place, and then we're back in this ongoing universe. Look, I think it slaps. I think Mission Impossible 2 definitely has its flaws. I think it is a movie that I was reading that they were rewriting some stuff as they were shooting. It feels like it. I think the John Woo cut, it's 3.5 hours, would probably be insane, but awesome. And I would very much like to see it. And it's a franchise finding its feet, but it's also a film that was giving audiences exactly what they wanted in the year 2000. And then some. Like if you wanted to go and see a Tom Cruise action movie in the year 2000, you wanted it to look and feel like this. You did not want what Mission Impossible is now. People will be like, this is boring. Where's the color? Where's the glamour? Where's the flamenco dancing?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think it's cool.
I still enjoyed it. I loved watching it. the nostalgia of it again, like I said, I remember seeing it in the cinema, and like you said, that poster was everywhere, on
I
buses.
had it on my wall in my
shops.
room for
Yeah,
years.
that's crazy. Yeah, so it was a big deal at the time. I can understand why people don't super love it. But yeah, it's the time capsule, a Mission Impossible time capsule of the year 2000 in Australia. Like, I almost feel like Ernie Dingo or Olivia Newton-John should have had a cameo in it because it was so Australian.
They really should
Um,
have, but that would have required them having more than 6 people in the entire film.
yes, that's true too.
No,
But
no one is in this movie. There's just a couple of actors on screen in this movie
yeah,
and some pigeons. That's it. There's no
which
one
was the
else.
other famous thing that was apparently came out where people was kind of hating on Tom Cruise. I don't know if you read this, but I do
Yeah, I
remember it
did.
where I'm like, oh, you know what I'm going to say about the people staring, looking him in the eye or whatever, and that was misconstrued as no. You just want when you film, just act natural. Don't all of it, everyone look and point because you're
Yeah,
ruining the
because the
shot.
film at the
which
race
makes them-
course, all the shots
Yeah.
got ruined because all the extras like, it's Tom Cruise. Like, yeah, no, but
Yeah.
not at the moment. He's Ethan Hunt.
Yeah,
The only other actor who actually shows up in this movie is the Spanish guy at the start in the villa,
Yeah.
the actor Antonio Vargas, who, as Australians, a lot of people know as the dad in Strictly Ballroom. When I saw him, I
yes,
was like, "It's the Strictly Ballroom dad." That was a very Australian moment. I was like, "Come on, yes, the Strictly Ballroom guys in this movie." But yeah, no one else. Oh, Tom Cruise's cousin, isn't it? His cousin William Mathifer plays one of the bad guys, the guy who's on the computer doing the transfer of stuff.
ah,
Who when you know they're cousins, you can look at him and be like, "Oh yeah, I can kind of see it." And
yeah,
his name is William Mathifer, and they're cousins because Tom Cruise's name is Thomas Cruise Mathifer III.
yeah,
His surname
yeah.
is not Cruise. It's just a fun little fact for our listeners. But yeah, I think it slaps. I think it's good. I think if people are listening because they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember Mission Impossible 2, that sucked," but you haven't watched it in a while, go
Yeah.
check it out again. You can
Yes.
stream it. You can buy the Blu-ray. It's around. You can find it really easy. Check it out. If you
I'm
like
sure it's
this
on
kind of
Paramount
movies,
Plus.
yeah, it's also on Binge at the moment if you got Binge.
Oh.
No free ads, but Binge if you want to give us money. But yeah, it's out there. You can get it. You can find it. Check it out. Have a couple of beers. Have a good time. You're probably going to really enjoy this movie. And then go and listen to the most 2000s thing in the world afterwards, which is the fact that Limp Bizkit did the song for it
Yes.
called "Take a Look Around," which has the music like the doom 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 doom, and then they turn it into new metal.
Yes,
and the
correct.
song actually has nothing to do with the movie at all. Like the
No.
lyrics are, "Now I know why you want to hate me, because hey, it's all about the sickest scene lately," or something like that. Very un-Mission Impossible lyrics.
Yep.
And also, again, like could not be further from Brian De Palma's 1996 Mission Impossible.
Oh, 100%.
Which was all like Hans Zimmer score and very like classy, elegant setup. And this one is just Fred Durst.
Yep.
Ridiculous. Any final thoughts for Mission Impossible 2?
No, I would say, yeah, I agree with you. Have a beer, sit down. If you want to.
Where does this rank for you? Or maybe we should maybe because we're probably going to do a few more Mission Impossible.
Yes,
so maybe
we will.
hold off.
We will be. Look,
on where it ranks.
yeah, maybe we need to rank the movies at the end.
Yeah, we'll save that as a little final. Because I think once we get through all the Mission Impossible movies, we'll probably really know how we feel about Mission Impossible 2 then.
Yes.
Maybe we'll get to the end and be like, "Oh boy, we really we oversold Mission Impossible 2." Or maybe we'll get to the end and be like, "Man, I miss Mission Impossible movies being Mission Impossible 2. I want what Ethan Hunt needs to grow his hair again. He needs to put on a bunch of masks and some voice changing sticky tape and just get back to what is good."
Yes, correct. Well, on that note, not all sequels suck.
Especially not this one, baby. Down, 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 down. Man, such a good song.
By definition alone, they're inferior films. Films.